Okay, welcome to week 3 of the Beyond the Veil intimacy study. We're joined by some friends today to discuss the principles of emotional intelligence or intimacy with God and people through the tunnel or the lane or the vehicle of emotional connection. And you see markers of emotional intimacy are a safe place, a place where we're willing to have an open and a vulnerable connection on our emotions. Last week we spoke on intellectual intimacy, which I covered. Today you'll see in the sermon that Tim spoke on emotional intimacy and did a really phenomenal job, of which I'm going to summarize some of those principles, and then we're going to discuss them as a group in this podcast. And you'll see in Philippians 2:1-2, and especially in verse 2, it says, to complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. And now this same mind, same love, all throughout Scripture, and especially in this verse, you see this propensity in God, not only for intellectual understanding and knowledge and revelation in the mind, but also an emotional capacity in God. That in order for us to truly learn and grow fully in God, we need to comprise ourselves of emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence as well. So with the focus being on emotional today, you can look to the design of the male and the female, Adam and Eve, from the Word, and actually really ascertain and capture a lot of different principles of who God is, because both man and woman were made in the image of God. And so those differences you've seen between maybe you and your spouse, or you and a male friend or a female friend, you can actually recognize elements of God, well, maybe not in their best form, but still elements of God inside of us in creation and how He designed us that express this part of God. And Tim did a great job today in really communicating that these differences of how we operate in God and the parts of God that we operate in our design, are actually invitations for us to experience God in that way. Now, this is really interesting, right? I think that in my life, I've seen that the love ability I have for this person, but then lack for that category of people. In my first early walk, it was hard for me to love really like religious leaders because of my history. And so the people that God would send in my life, I would take it as a love challenge to grow in that ability to love them the way Christ loves them. And so you can see these people in our lives that have this capacity to truly feel and to feel fully. If you're not comfortable with it, take it as an invitation to learn to experience the fullness of God's emotional capacity. And what I really loved on this is you see in Galatians 5:22, the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, etc., etc. And what Tim said was really great was that there's first the emotions of God. These are fruits, right? Love and joy and peace. These emotions come from, are manifested from relationship with God and being in God's presence. And what an amazing concept, right? Is to truly be growing with the Lord and to be in intimacy with Him, to be in His presence. It's actually to experience Him not only in our minds, but also in our emotions. And when we really begin to understand this, then we can be open to the full range of what God wants to do in our life. And there's 4 things I want to leave you with in this outline, and then we'll discuss. It says you were created for intimacy. The second thing is emotional intimacy requires risk and is based in love. And God invites deeper intimacy through His commands. So really understand that when God invites us to something, calls us to something, it's actually an invitation to intimacy. And the fourth thing and the last thing is understand intimacy with God equips us towards intimacy with other people. He is leading you in greater intimacy with Himself so that you can be in healthy and more deep and profound intimacy with others in your life. I hope that this discussion and these teachings today really equip you to begin to go down this journey of real emotional growth and intimacy with God and other people.
Hi, we are really glad that you're with us today for the podcast. I don't know if you had the opportunity to hear Pastor Tim speak today on emotional intimacy with God. It was really powerful. Make sure you listen to it if you didn't get a chance to hear it. And then you heard Tim Sam just now kind of give you a preview of what we're talking about, which is emotional intimacy. And I noticed that Sam said emotional intelligence and emotional intimacy, and he kind of equated the two. And I find that's really interesting because emotional intelligence is the ability to understand your own emotions and others and interact in a way that brings health. And intimacy kind of is a place where we live, even if we're not quite healthy yet, but it's a place where we live with God and begin to know God intimately, and He knows us, and we feel very safe. So today we're going to be talking with some people I want to introduce you to. This is Stephenie.
Hello.
Hi, Steph. Welcome.
Hi, thank
This
you.
is Ashlee, and this is Nat.
Hello.
And we're all here today just to discuss these concepts, and hopefully it'll kind of prime the pump for your own discussion in your discipleship group. The first question I have is for Ashlee. Ashlee, can you think of a time when you experienced true emotional intimacy with God?
Yeah, of course. I was thinking about this earlier and just kind of looking back on all of the times in my life, I started recognizing I had this theme of just really trying in certain relationships and friendships and not necessarily getting met with the same amount of either excitement or just kind of ending up in rejection. And I had this season a few years back where I felt like I kept trying with this person because I felt like God kept wanting me to push in with love. And every single time I kind of was just met with this disappointment and this frustration of like, God, I'm trying, like I'm doing the thing that you asked, and I feel like I'm not getting anywhere. And I had this moment where I felt like He lifted the veil a bit where I could see of like, oh, God, you feel this way sometimes. Like how often do you lean in with love and pursuit, and we don't either hear you, see you, or acknowledge that you're there? How often are you face to face with us, but we're so distracted by the things of day-to-day life that we miss it, we miss you? And that was one of the things that kind of wrecked me and opened my heart up to Him in a new way, where I was like, God, I don't want to miss it with you. I don't want to be that person that is so consumed with the things going on in my world that, like, for example, when I was in school, I was every day like, okay, God, what do you have for today? And every time His response was, I love you. And I'm like, yeah, I know that, like, but what do you have? And He's like, I love you. So it's one thing that's kind of slowed me down a bit in my day-to-day, where I'm leaning more into Him so that when He comes with the I love yous, there's this soaking in this being with Him. It's not just this drive and this do, like, I gotta go get the thing done, I gotta serve the kingdom. I'm like, no, you just want to be with me. And there's this exchange of heart to heart of like, okay, that's all you desire, is this intimate relationship with us, and how everything that He does is an invitation to greater intimacy. And so often we miss it. So
It's really interesting. I thought of the story of Mary and Martha in the Bible. With Martha, it was always the do,
Yeah.
got to get it done. And Mary just wanted to sit at the feet of Jesus and listen to Him and what He had to say.
right.
What's your experience, Nat?
Of true emotional intimacy with God.
Yes.
Well, it's actually been quite a journey. I know we often in the church talk about how sometimes our relationship with our parents can affect our relationship with God, or how we view God, right? We use these terms of God the Father, right? And so growing up, my parents got divorced when I was in elementary school. And then when I was in middle school, my mom remarried. And I just was never really connected to the father figure that was in my home. And my dad lived states away. So I just, with my parents were amazing, but I never really trusted them with my emotions. Like, they provided for me, like, they were really great. But there wasn't the emotional intimacy that I feel now I want to like have with my kids one day, you know? And so when I started coming to church and really taking like relationship with the Lord seriously, I did come across these blocks where, well, Jesus is a man. The men in my life have let me down. Like, right? Like, so all these like, because there was mistrust with parents, the people of authority in my life, I found myself having mistrust in God because of it. And just like Ashlee was saying, like, being in these places with the Lord where maybe the mistrust wasn't clear, but Him making it clear and being like, I love you anyway. right? And at the beginning of my relationship with the Lord, he really used other people to romance my heart. Like, I think some people have these amazing like one-on-one moments with the Lord, but that wasn't the case for me. Like, God used people because I didn't trust people. I didn't trust my parents. God used people to prophesy into my life, right? To call me out in places of love, like just showing me gentleness through people. I was able to feel his love and begin to trust him. And then from that place, he just began to do things for me, right? Like, I would see miracles, I would see answered prayers, and that's how the trust was developed. Like, he's not just, he doesn't just talk about his love, he shows it, right? And for me, it was through people.
That is so good. Thanks for sharing that. You know, I can relate. I was raised with an alcoholic dad, and there was just a lot of violence in the home. And I remember when I first came to God and they talked about God the Father and that he was loving and merciful and all this stuff, I couldn't make that connection, right? Because I was like, well, yeah, but he probably thinks I'm doing everything wrong. Or, you know, and I couldn't, it was so hard to get over how I related to my natural dad with looking at God. And you're right, God is so patient with us and brings us in and nurtures us and uses all kinds of circumstances and people to get us to the place where we can trust him. What about you, Stephenie?
So I'm actually kind of living in this right now. I don't know if you know or not, Jim, but recently I lost my husband. So it's been a roller coaster of emotions, and emotional intimacy with God is just, it's been so real. He showed up in my brokenness and in my deepest pain. And there's something about that. Sorry.
It's okay.
That's for me.
The tissues.
Yeah. But just allowing him to meet me in my brokenness, I've experienced so much joy. Even in the midst of my pain, he's met me there on the floor, face down. Just, this is what I can offer. Nothing. I have nothing to offer but my heart. And just to see him show up has been so amazing.
That's beautiful.
And I'm just so thankful, like, that he's able to be there with me in my brokenness, because he makes me go on, and he's my husband now. He's my provider. He's my protector. He's my everything. And my world it like has a big question mark on it right now. Things are uncertain and unknown, but God, I know he'll take care of it all, and he meets me where I am. And for that, I'm grateful.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. I think that, you know, maybe we can't relate specifically to that because that's an amazing testimony. But I do know that, you know, recently I was diagnosed with something that supposedly is supposed to be terminal, you know, unless I get a transplant.
Okay.
And I remember I lost my job, or I chose to leave my job because I couldn't take it anymore. And just a lot kind of culminated at that point. And I found that God was the same for me. You know, the idea of laying flat on the floor without, just feeling like there is no solution for me. I cannot make a solution for this. God needs to intervene, or I'm toast, you know. And he does show up at those times, and it's so intimate and so powerful how he ministers to us. And it's also almost impossible to put it into words, because how do you explain what happens? It's like, it's impossible to really put it in concrete terms, but you just sense his presence. You know he's there. He speaks to you. He picks you up, and he gives you the ability to continue and to trust. So thanks for sharing that. Nat, can you tell me, how does intimacy with God provide comfort for you? Comfort, peace, and strength during challenging times.
I think now I've been walking with the Lord for real walking with the Lord for 8 years now, I want to say. And the struggles don't ever really leave, but I feel like trusting God gets easier. At least it has for me, not because there's a lack of trust or I have it figured out, but because I've seen him do it over and over and over and over and over again. And because I've developed this intimacy with him where I've seen him be there for me in these different times in my life, I know that he's going to do it again. Because he was faithful then, he's going to be faithful now. And we're talking about having question marks in life, and like you said, you have to provide the solution. And it's with the intimacy, I know he will, and so even when my emotions want to lean into fear or doubt, I can lean on the testimonies of other people, but also the testimonies that he's done for me, the things that he's done for me. I know that he's going to continue to be faithful. So I'm just thankful that the Lord that we serve is not one that runs out of grace or love or miracles, right? So just continuing to walk with him is the way that I get comfort and peace.
Amen.
Yeah.
What about for you, Ashlee? How do you feel like God has helped you during troubling times, bring peace and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so bear with me because I'm already feeling emotional, so I might cry. I think the beauty of it is, Nat's talking about, is you build this history with the Lord. So you watch him show up time and time and again. And I think it's so interesting that we as humans keep ending back up in these places where we're confronted with hey, why do you forget this? Why do you forget how faithful he is and the time he came through and that thing that you didn't know how you were going to make it out? And the comfort of knowing that he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And then understanding too, he died for my humanity, so he's not afraid of it. He's not afraid of the full expression of the doubt and the frustration and the question marks that I have about God, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And I think one thing that has really allowed me to trust him more and more is that I feel full permission to be able to express all of the things that are in here. Because life is hard. Things happen oftentimes out of our control.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
So you said that you feel comfortable expressing everything that's in there. Do you mean the thoughts that aren't mature and that aren't worded right? The occasional expletive?
Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever.
For example,
what do you mean?
I remember when my mom was really sick years ago at the beginning stages of it, and we didn't know what was going on. I was also going through an autoimmune disease at the time, and I remember sitting in my car, and I just went off. I started yelling about how unfair it was, and okay, God, you're a healer, you're a God of miracles, but we're not experiencing it. And just all of these questions, coming out, and probably a couple swear words too, just the authentic, this sucks, and I don't get it. But then having to confront it with, but God, I know you're good.
Yeah.
I know that you're faithful. I know that you can perform miracles, and I don't understand it. And there was this thing he gave me a couple years ago, and it was, hey, can you learn to sit next to the man of mystery, holding all the questions of life in your hands that you don't understand, and can you trust me with the outcome of it? Can you trust me with the timeline of it? Can you continue to reinforce that belief system of I'm good, I'm here, and I love you?
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about God is that there's so many faces to him, and there's so many aspects to him. I remember when I was going through things with my mom's health, I was talking to my friend Kirsten, he's a healer. Why aren't we seeing this? And she told me, but what is he showing you?
Right.
Maybe he's not showing himself as the healer in this moment, but is he being a provider? Right. Is he being a father? Is he being a friend? And I feel like sometimes we can get so narrow-minded and short-sighted, and it's God, you're not showing up like I want you to show up, but he is showing up.
And the beauty of not excusing where you're at. Because I think sometimes in the church we've done these things where we're okay, I'm going to be joyful, and we try to almost force ourselves out of the emotion or the process of it. But David he emptied.
Right.
everything. And oftentimes in the Psalms, you see him starting way up here in emotion, and he's expressing and he's emptying, and then oh, but God, I trust you. Oh,
Right.
God, you're mighty. There's this filling, this exchange
Yeah.
with the Lord.
David is a perfect example
Yes.
of just pouring everything out to God. It didn't sound pretty. He threatened, he said, God, break the teeth of my enemies. Like, he was mad, right? He was like into
Crush
it.
them all.
Yeah, or God, where are you? I'm forsaken. And, it's just like, it's beautiful to see that, and to see that he always came back to reliance
Right.
upon God. I don't want to push too much with this situation because you have been through recent serious trauma, but how does this, you mentioned that, God showed himself to you and was very real to you and has helped you through this situation. Can you give us a little bit more on that and talk about, like, when you cried out to God, like what did you experience and how did he show up? What did he use other people to help you, or was it more just like internal strength, or what did you experience?
It's all been, I would say, supernatural, really. It's just things that it's hard to put into words, like we were talking about. Just through prayer and, praying for Rob, and, you guys got me when you were talking about healing. It's like, I never questioned why, because who am I? But in those moments, like, I never lost faith that he would get healed. And all that to say, like, I do believe he got healed because he had the ultimate healing. He's in heaven now, so he won, right?
Yeah.
But, just experiencing him on a whole new spiritual level for me has been such a game changer in my life, in my faith, in the faith of our daughters. We have 2 girls who are without a dad now, but they've gotten to see our Heavenly Father at work through this situation, and they're watching me to see how I react. So it's also a good teaching lesson for my girls, Not that,
Absolutely.
This isn't what would be ideal. I wouldn't
Right.
ask for this
Sure.
for anyone, but God does take your brokenness and he turns it into beautiful things. And he's met me so many times. And one instance was pretty cool, just a little intimate thing. It was between him and Rob, but the way it affected me as well was just, and people all over, because now I get to share this story. So when Rob was in his final moments, I heard him. He was at home on hospice, but he was laying there in bed, and he'd come to every once in a while, and he was like mumbling. So I leaned in real close, and I was like, "I'm here, babe. What's going on?" He's like, "Mansion house. I'm becoming perfect. I'm becoming perfect." And I was like, "Babe, are you talking to Jesus?" He's like, "Yes." And so that was something that I get to hang on to, and just knowing that he was experiencing God in that moment of his final time here on earth is just a treasure that I hang on to. And this is cool because I asked, so this is like my intimacy with that, because I prayed, I was like, "God, please just give me something that I can hang on to."
Yeah.
And then that happened, and I was like, "Thank you. Like, I can treasure that. I get to hang on to that.
Right.
And I get to share that story with people.
Yeah.
And they might get to experience you for the first time ever, because you can't refute that."
Right.
That's
Absolutely. I've been teaching God's Word for years, and we sometimes teach in such a way that we give people this idea that if you have enough faith, or if you're truly following God, then everything's going to be amazing. And there's always going to be the storybook ending to every problem. And we don't mean to come across that way, but I feel like sometimes in church that message comes out. And the truth is that God does hear every prayer, and he delivers us sometimes from our situation, or sometimes through our situation, and he requires us to walk through it. And he's with us the entire time, and he hears every prayer. But he doesn't always give us that like miraculous
Right.
thing, even though that's what we all want. You know, you would want your husband to be miraculously healed.
Right.
My wife wants my body to be miraculously healed, you know. But the truth is that we trust God, and we trust in the timing, and we trust that his way is perfect. And so we may have to walk through some difficult things, and being able to just be intimate with Jesus and just say what we're really thinking and feeling is so important. And for our kids to see that in our
Right.
lives. So thanks for sharing all that. This is a really personal question here, not like the others haven't been. But this one says, are there areas in your life that you've not fully trusted God? Are there areas in your life? Do you guys have an awareness of something in your life or somewhere where you haven't truly trusted God? What do you think, Ashlee?
I think that there is always going to be a temptation on a daily basis to not trust him.
I do too.
Finances,
Yeah.
health, your life. I think a big thing for me that I've worked through this last year that comes up from time to time, you know, I'm in my late 20s, I still live at home, single woman, and I'm in debt. So there's this big question mark of, okay, God, what the heck are we doing? And there's this temptation to often take the trajectory of my life into my own hands and to just go do something. Get a second job, get out of debt, make this happen, make that happen. And there's a lot of things that I can do in my own strength, but it wouldn't be in relationship with him, because if he's not calling me to it, there's not a grace for it. So I think oftentimes I have to remind myself, like, he sees, he knows, he's very aware of my situation, and learning to process those natural emotions on a day-to-day basis with him of, like, I mean, there's times where I'm great and it's grand and I could care less, and then there's other days where it's a bit harder. And I think on those days I'm having to learn more and more to lean into the words over my life, what he's directly told me, what the scriptures say, and then even leaning into the community around me, like, hey, I'm having a hard time with this today, and I'm really struggling to believe that this is what God has said, because it hasn't happened yet. And so learning to lean on community to offer strength, offer comfort. And I think one thing we forget sometimes is intimacy either requires you to give an invitation or to receive an invitation. Like, you have to step towards it in some way, shape, or form. Like Tim was mentioning, it's a risk. And I think trusting God sometimes feels like a risk. Like, okay, it hasn't happened. I haven't seen the thing yet. But okay, God, I'm going to choose to trust you. And it's not this ethereal feeling and experience. It's a lot of just learning to lean in and go, I know who you are. We've built history together through testimonies of other people, through testimonies in my life, or even through the word. Like, if we're someone who doesn't have that long track of the Lord showing up in all these ways, like leaning into the word, because we get stuck often.
And how often when we're trying to trust God in something, but the enemy brings those thoughts.
Right.
You know, it's like
In a
just
loop.
pinging. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, stop it, you know.
And I'm guilty of it. I've gotten stuck in those emotional loops and those
Yeah.
thoughts that spiral, and it sometimes will take another person or me intentionally stopping and going, okay, God, but what do you say? Like, where are you in this that I'm missing it because I'm trying to move past it into something else?
Really good.
Yeah.
What do you think, Nat?
I'm not here.
Like, move along.
Yeah. There is one thing. It's super personal. Another thing that's come up recently, like, for the past 3 years, 2 years, I'd say, I've been kind of processing leaving ministry. I was the youth director at another church, and I thought that that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Like, I was like, this is it. I'm going to be 80 years old, and I'm still going to be a youth pastor. I loved it. And some things ended up happening with the church where I didn't feel comfortable remaining in leadership. And so I felt like, because I made the decision, like, I'm going to step away from this, that I had disappointed God. Like, this is what he had put, like, this is what he had called me to, and I ended up saying no. Like, I was essentially being disobedient is what I felt like. so processing, like, what is my purpose in life, you know? And so I, like, praying, reading the Bible were all very, like, triggering for me and
Right.
very anxiety inducing, because whenever, like, I did a lot of that for the ministry, right? Like, I'm teaching, I'm spending time, like, praying for the youth kids, praying for wisdom, praying for these things. So these things that I'm now doing for me, period, I couldn't do them. They brought me a lot of anxiety. And so I remember your mom, Pam, telling me how she went like a year or 2 years where she wouldn't open up her Bible. Like, she just couldn't do it either. And how faithful God was to her in those moments where it seems like, well, no, if you're a Christian, you should be reading your Bible all the time, every day, right? And so it was beautiful to see God work in those places in my life where I wasn't necessarily making the time to be in that secret place or that quiet time, because the enemy was torturing me in it.
Right.
You know, so it was like God wanted me to trust him, and hey, our relationship's going to look differently. Right? But me being stuck in, like, no, I have to pray. No, I have to read the Bible. But it was religion, right? Because if I'm really with the Lord, then I wouldn't be feeling the anxiety. I wouldn't be feeling the fear. So it was trusting God in, okay, however you want to spend time with me, right? Like, we can put ourselves in these boxes and put God in those boxes. And so recently, I'm still working through that. I'm still working through that. Like, I would be able to just sit and read 3 chapters or whatever, and then Blue Letter Bible it, and then journal it. You know, it's like, you know what? All I can handle right now is 1 chapter. Like, and I'm just gonna read that,
okay.
and that's it. And so, it sounds kind of silly. Like, I'm trusting God with my relationship with him. Like, I think it should look this way, or I've known it to be this way, but he's saying, I'm actually showing you another side of, like, who I am. Like, I don't need you to perform, or I don't need you to do whatever you think. Right. So that's been very interesting.
That's amazing. You know, we often fall into that, don't we? Like a checklist
Yes.
of what we're required to do to be good boys and girls.
Right.
You know, instead of like, I love you, so I want to spend time. Yeah, that we can fall into that.
Yeah.
I was thinking, as you guys were talking, about something in my life that I think that I struggle with trusting God with, and that is right now, because of my physical situation, I'm not working full time, and so my wife is, and I'm old school, right? I should be the one.
Yeah.
She should be able to stay home if she wants or whatever, and so it's been hard for me just to trust God that it's okay for this season, you know, it's okay, and she's okay, and she said she never complains about it, but it's just all me. I need to trust him that it's okay, and to take a breath and be like, okay, God, you have me here at this time for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I would agree.
what about you? Do you have anything that comes to mind in particular?
Like, in this moment that I'm in, I can honestly say, like, no. Because I'm just, like, almost, like, I want to say taking advantage of it. I'm like,
Oh, that's
okay,
awesome.
God, like, here I am.
You're like, what else am I
Like,
supposed to
I'm
do?
just-
There's
yeah.
nothing else.
Right.
So
I'm like,
trust him.
Yeah, well, this is the situation I'm in, so I'm here,
that's
and I
beautiful.
love you, and I know you'll take care of me and my girls, and, you know, I mean, but that's big picture. Like, I trust you, you know, I know you've got us.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, Ashley, there is, you know, those day-to-day things where you're like, and the enemy will try to creep in and be like, well, how are you going to do this? Or, you know, you should have that. Or, you know, you don't have that. You
Right.
know, and this is what you are. And, you know, and so it's those little instances where you have to, okay, capture every thought. And that's what I'm like loving right now, is just capturing those thoughts. And I'm really focusing on that and just getting violent, like,
That's
with
good.
those
Yeah.
thoughts and attacking them, because I have the power and authority, and
Yes.
I will say what is true, what God sees as true of me. That's what I'm going to speak over my life. So that's what I'm taking.
That's amazing. Preach it. I love
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Good job. I'm kind of backtracking a little bit because I was thinking as you guys are all talking, and we're talking about trusting God, and we're talking about emotional intimacy, we really didn't talk much about dealing with other people who don't see life the same way. And I'm going to give you an example. I don't think he's going to mind if I share this. One of my sons has a situation where he trusts God and he has emotional intimacy with God,
Right.
but some of his good friends seriously betrayed him. Like it was a very, very hurtful thing.
Yeah.
And it really threw him for a loop. And it wasn't that he wasn't trusting God, it was that he was trusting people.
Right.
And it fell apart. How do you deal intimately with people who maybe don't have those same level of intimacy with God or even a desire to be intimate with God? And so, it makes things messy. Ashlee, how do you deal with that?
Oh gosh, I have faced a lot of that in my life, just in friendships alone. I think a big thing for me was I've heard my parents say it over and over and over again, you have to find these things in the Lord, right? And I didn't realize that I was trying to put the source of love and relationship on people, not understanding that it has to come from the Lord first. And also learning to recognize and discern that some people, unfortunately, are not in the same place as you. I'm willing to jump in to the depths of emotion and intimacy and just scratch your heart and let's just talk about all of your trauma and I'll share you mine and just build relationship. And it scared some people, and I didn't realize that it wasn't necessarily me they were rejecting, but it's that they weren't ready for it. So I think there's this tandem of understanding where the people in your life are at and where they're willing to go, right? And then I feel also trusting that God is going to bring alongside people who do see you, people who do value those places of your heart and in your life. And it took me a long time to find friends that are really good at asking questions, that are really good at staying steady when you're kind of on the fence and wobbly in certain areas, that can challenge you and pull and draw things out. And it takes work. I think sometimes we have to grow friends when we're not surrounded by them, and sometimes that looks like going first emotionally. And I think one thing I've recognized in some of my friendships in the past is people are really comfortable with being oh, it's me and God. It's me and God. Because yes, families hurt them, the world's hurt them, we've all been there. But I think they miss out on the gift of relational intimacy that God has in friendships. They can't see it. So understanding that when you do meet those friends, they'll be able to handle it, they'll be able to lean in. I remember when I was in school, I was so used to being the person that just loved on everybody and pulled people out. I never really had someone do that same thing to me because either they weren't equipped or they were in their own brokenness, who knows. But I had these two older girls that I lived with, and I'm the big sister. I have an older brother and a younger sister, but I always wanted to be the big sister. And I've never had anyone do that for me. It had always switched somehow to where I'm ministering. And I don't even remember what triggered me, but I ended up in my room and I was just kind of having a moment of panic and I wanted to isolate. I didn't want to be around anybody. And I hear this knock on the door and they cracked it open and they were like, "Hey Ash, can we come in?" And everything in me was go away. No, you don't get to see me like this. And I didn't say anything, so they took that as a yes and quietly came in and sat next to me and started asking me questions. Well, it ended up with them I'm on the ground crying and they're holding me because they had dug up something in my heart that was I didn't know that was there. Yeah. And time and again that happened where I would try to sit and process things with the Lord and I could not tap in. But the second I would bring it to them, it's this tears, this waterfall would come out and I was oh, there's a gift here in the relationship with the people. You've put me with safe people, so it's okay. And understanding that these guys can meet me where I'm at right now.
That's great. Yeah, I noticed that there are some people that really do like to go deep right off the bat, and they like to stay deep. Right. And there are some people that they're just not comfortable.
Right.
They don't want to know, and they don't want you to try to find out what's deep in them either. They just like a nice surface level sort of acquaintance type relationship. What's been your experience with that?
don't know. I feel like I grew up being friends with everybody. I grew up like being that. Just I'll share all my business. I'll overshare. And recently in adulthood, I've kind of retrieved a little bit because of betrayal, because of mistrust. And I teach third grade, so I'm like constantly managing friendships and relationships. And my heart, like I tell the kids, you don't have to be best friends with everyone.
Right.
Like, you're just not gonna be. Like, there's 21 of you. Not all of you are gonna be best friends. But that doesn't mean, I teach at a Christian school, so that doesn't mean we don't get to be kind and love like Jesus and be respectful and be forgiving. And so, like, applying that to my life where it's like, I don't need to go deep with everyone, right? Like, and if I take that risk and that leap of faith and there's betrayal or whatever it may be, or they don't meet me the way that I feel like they should meet me, like, okay, I tried it.
Okay.
I can move on, right? So I loved what you said, that sometimes you have to grow friends, right? Like, I love that and I fully believe that. But I think there's also wisdom with the Lord. Like, that's just not your tribe, or those are not your people.
Right.
Like, not everybody gets to experience the deepest places of your heart. And that was hard for me because I've always just been like, everybody, you know? But realizing, like, that doesn't mean that I'm closed off.
Right.
That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm mean. I just need to protect, like, I need to protect my things. And so, not in a way that I'm being closed off, but God, give me the wisdom.
Right.
Like, who's gonna value it? Who's gonna treat it like the treasure that it is?
I think he does teach us discernment,
Right.
Yes,
right, where we
that's
can
what I was
kind of
thinking.
sense this person is somebody that I can open up to, or whatever, and this person, be careful. Yeah.
And still choosing to forgive, right? Like, when there's betrayal, when you take that risk, like, you have to forgive, because if there's still bitterness or unforgiveness in your heart, like, at the end of the day, that's just gonna affect you. Right?
Absolutely.
Like, even if that person never knows, like, forgive them in your heart so that you can move on and continue to lean into emotional intimacy, because we need it.
We sure do. You know, I had a friend that I've been friends with for like 17 years. He's a guy friend, and we have shared things or whatever, but I learned that really there was just only a certain level that we could get to, and that he tended to try to kind of manipulate our friendship to get me to do what he wanted me to do. I won't go into details, but it was a long time of that before I kind of went, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
I see. And then recently I've become friends with Sam, and we almost immediately had a connection of just sharing the things of God, but not just God stuff, but friendship stuff, right? And the other day we were at Starbucks and we were talking, and I said, sorry, I'm probably talking too much, I said to him. And I stopped, and he goes, why did you say that? And I said, well, because I felt like I was probably oversharing. He goes, I didn't say that. Did I say that? I like it when you share.
Right.
And so he called me on it, and I was like, and then at the end of the conversation, I basically said the same thing again. I said, oh, never mind. And he goes, you did it again. And he called me on it, and I thought, yes, I need that.
So good.
You know, and because I needed that level of friendship with somebody that was just like, tells me the truth,
Right.
Yeah.
you know. And so I can go deep with somebody that I can trust
Right.
to tell me the truth, and he can tell me you're being an idiot or whatever,
Right.
because frankly sometimes I am.
Yeah.
So anyway, but that's awesome. What's been your experience with dealing with people, and how deep to go with friendships and things like that?
Well, you took my word. Discernment came to mind,
Right.
and you know, the Holy Spirit just gives you that sense of like, okay, this person you kind of have to take it easy with,
Right.
and you know, don't overshare. So I love that, you know, we have that connection to do that,
Yeah.
and that He lets us know, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's bringing me back to Rob and my situation, like with my story. Like, people don't just get my whole story. Like,
Right.
you have to earn my story, you know. And then there's just those people who will maybe even like you said, try to manipulate and
Right.
say things that are even hurtful, and so you don't know how to experience, like, where to go from there. So you just have to, I don't know,
Yeah.
listen to
You
God.
need to have intimacy with the Lord
Yeah.
to
That's
know
right.
who
There
to be
you go.
You
intimate
have
with.
to know it.
And if I could add something too, is like recognizing that you can still enjoy people for the areas in life that they're in, right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember my second year of school, God was like, I don't want you to make any friends. Like, I'm going to bring you 3 women. And I was like, that's weird. But he did. He brought me 3, and they were all at just one who could go really deep, who was really good at going to the deep places of emotional intimacy and just the things of God. And then I had another friend that was just really fun, and we'd watch movies and we'd go on adventures, and recognizing that not one friend is going to meet all of the different needs that my heart has. Like, God's going to bring multiple individuals into my life that are going to draw different things out of me. That some will earn those intimate places, like you're saying, like, oh, it's okay to be like, you can earn this. You work for the deep places of my heart. And I'm also solid in the Lord that if people miss it, I'm okay. Like,
Right.
it's not the end of the world because I know where I'm settled. But I can still value each person and this seasonal friendships, that not everybody's forever. Sometimes people come into our lives for a moment in time, and that's okay. It's a gift. And you can treasure those things rather than just the woe of when it ends. Like, you mourn it. There's a process. But people are gifts in and out of season.
Yeah, and I think that's true for marriage as well. Like, my first year of marriage, because I had transitioned churches, my husband Braden was my only friend, and because I just come out of that betrayal that I mentioned earlier, the girl that I was really close to, I wasn't anymore. And that first year, like, all it was is Braden. And then our second year, I was like, oh, I need girlfriends. Like, so even in marriage, like, yes, that person is your everything, and like, after Jesus, like, the person that you're the most intimate with, but you still need different types of friendships. And he needs his guide time as well. Like, that's how we stay whole. That's how we stay full, because we have different people can meet those different needs.
Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing and being willing to open up and talk about things that you've been through, things you're going through. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say to you who are listening to the podcast, there's no way that we could cover this entire topic. It's huge. Emotional intimacy talks about the comfort level of just sharing everything you are and everything that's going through your life with God. And of course, we know He knows.
Yeah.
But the ability to open up and share it willingly with Him, the good, the bad, the ugly, is crucial for our emotional and spiritual health. And also, as you can tell, dealing with people sometimes gets messy, but it's so important for our health and to even to experience like the fullness of God through people. And so it is just an absolute important thing for us to consider. And if you heard Pastor Tim's message today, you know he talked about the difference between men and women. And some of that's overgeneralization. He's aware of that. But there are definite differences in the way that we process things and deal with things. So if you're someone who just doesn't deal well with emotions, or you've been afraid to consider your emotions, realize that you were made in the likeness and the similitude of God, which includes all those feelings. And so He wants to help us work through those things and understand them better. So I invite you to study with us on emotional intimacy with God. Thank you so much.
Awesome.